This week on Act Out, could it be true that the House of Representatives introduced progressive legislation to address our painfully corrupted electoral system? Well, kinda. Here's a look at H.R. 1 and why we need to look beyond the veil of sweet-sounding reforms. Next up, a similar problem with the recently passed War Powers Resolution that aims to cut our support of the genocide in Yemen. Then it's Medicare for all, not Medicare for some. A look at how the establishment wants to dodge universal health care and why. Finally, Remote Area Medical shows us what healthcare looks like for the most marginalized by doing what our healthcare system doesn't, offering medical care for free. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. A noise flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So, I actually want to start off today with some good news. Two good news items that wouldn't exist were it not for the powerful work of activism. In reality, there's very little good news these days that isn't tied directly to the work of community organizing and activism, and I can't say that enough. So, first off, last week a federal judge dismissed a racketeering lawsuit brought by Energy Transfer Partners against Greenpeace, which claimed that the environmental organization had spread misinformation and incited crimes during the battle against DAPL in North Dakota. In a statement on the ruling, Greenpeace General Counsel Tom Wetterer said that this ruling would serve as a check on corporate efforts to silence dissent. Indeed. And it's of course quite clear that the $900 million lawsuit, yes, $900 million, would not ever have been brought had it not been for the work of activists successfully confronting corporate malfeasance and power. A huge congrats to Greenpeace on this and all of those who fought and are still fighting this horrendous company. Our next bit of good news will really, I hope, bring a smile to your face. Last week, Amazon announced that it was pulling out of the $3 billion deal to build its headquarters in Queens, New York. The deal, which we have covered on this show, would have seen New Yorkers subsidizing the giant to the tune of $3 billion while also dealing with the inevitable economic fallout that Amazon always brings with it. Not surprisingly, Team Capitalist was quick to shit all over the decision. Business Insider, for example, lamented that this decision was, quote, a kick in the face for the people who bet big on property in Queens. They failed to mention the kick in the face it would have been for people who live and have lived in Queens that would be painfully priced out of their homes and properties amid the sick corporate takeover of their community. But yeah, let's all shed a tear for Barbara and Kent's fourth property that'll have to now be purchased elsewhere. In their statement, Amazon didn't directly credit activists, but the reality is quite clear. In a tweet on February 14th, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who herself represents the Bronx and Queens, aptly tweeted that anything is possible. Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world. At times when the scale of what we're fighting for or against seems too great, when the power they hold seems remarkable compared to our own, wins like these remind us that we are the ones who have that power. Our combined and collaborative efforts are the only thing that they really fear, because it's the only thing that really works. A big congrats to folks in Queens and all of New York City. Moving on, a couple of weeks back, we talked about S1, the Senate's first bill which dealt primarily with cracking down on the First Amendment. This week, we're taking a look at H.R. 1, which incidentally actually has some good points. The problem, of course, is that these points, which we'll talk about in a minute, share room in a bill that's just a It's just a morass of proposals and findings covering everything from homeland security to education to labor to space and technology, intelligence, and then some. Titled the For the People Act, this bill's main focus is election, campaign finance, and ethics reforms, designed to make voting easier as well as curb the power of big donors and reduce conflicts of interest in all three branches of government. To that end, it would create a public financing system for House elections. It would restore voting rights to millions via giving felons the right to vote once their sentences are over. It would require that all states automatically register voters who submit paperwork to a state government agency, unless the person opts out. It would provide same-day voter registration, allow 15 days of early voting with sites located near public transportation. You would use nonpartisan redistricting commissions to draw new congressional maps, enable online voter registration, count provisional ballots from eligible voters filed at the wrong polling place, and use paper ballots in addition to electronic voting systems. Damn. Election Day would also become a holiday for all federal employees. Private sectors would also be encouraged to follow suit. The bill's Disclose Act would mandate that all organizations must disclose donor information for political campaigns, an attempt to throw light on dark money. The bill also takes a stab, albeit a very weak one, at the revolving door, stating that federal contracting officers would be banned from accepting any compensation from a contractor that they awarded a contract to for 2 years after leaving office. So, to put it mildly, there's a lot in this one, and a lot of it is really good. The bill might even make it to the Senate. However, there it will probably die. Everyone's least favorite jackass turtle, Mitch McConnell, has already said that he wouldn't bring the legislation up for a vote. And to be perfectly honest, why would Senate Dems want to address things like gerrymandering and election fraud, paper ballots, when they have more than a few fingers in those pies? And yet, I do think it's important that we acknowledge these moves and vocally support them. That being said, there are two very important reasons to not be a fan of H.R. 1. As Bruce Dixon of Black Agenda Report noted in a recent post, H.R. 1's legislative payloads, the parts of H.R. 1 actually intended to attract enough Republican support to pass into law, are in fact its proposal to cut third-party campaign funding in half, and it's institutionalizing an annual threat report to be written by the Pentagon and the cops. What? Yes. Let me explain. Remember way back after the 2016 elections when Prop or Not magically appeared on the media scene claiming it could tell all of us, poor ignorant proles, what was real news and what was fake? Or really, what was Russian propaganda and what was true red, white, and blue bullshit? I mean news. Prop or Not even set up a list which included the likes of Truth Out, Mint Press News, Black Agenda Report, WikiLeaks, and more. Well, fast forward to today, and H.R. 1 not only titles Prop or Not's work as congressional findings, but seeks to then use this as the foundation for an annual report on the threats posed to the security of the U.S. electoral system that are posed by Americans who might be under the influence of foreign powers, to be drawn up by the Pentagon. A terrifying and eerie nod to our reporting earlier this year on how the Pentagon has carte blanche to turn the military-industrial complex on its own citizenry, under the guise of protecting us from an insurrection. Furthermore, how the fuck can you have a bill chock full of election reform and in the same bill basically say, I mean, it's still not our fault that our election system sucks. It's still the Russians' fault, but also these reforms. I mean, did the Russians make you put that other shit in the bill? If so, thanks, Putin. I'm so surprised that you've taken such an interest in our gerrymandering and felon disenfranchisement. In a way, though, it's actually quite brilliant. It allows House Dems to sick the intelligence and military machine on its own people, while also paying lip service to the same people with promises of reform. Well played. The other facepalm-worthy aspect of H.R. 1, as noted earlier, is its assault on third parties. The Dems have written in this wink and nod olive branch to Republicans to show them that they're serious about staying in power, even if they're willing to throw a few breadcrumbs our way. Like a two-headed king protecting its throne, H.R. 1 would raise the qualifying amount for third parties from its current level of $5,000 to $25,000 in 20 states. Needless to say, this would be disastrous for parties like the Greens, who already have a very hard time accessing ballots, and even when they do, they're more likely to be handcuffed to a chair for 8 hours than actually allowed onto a debate stage, which, by the way, is exactly what happened to Green Party candidates Jill Stein and Sherry Honkala in 2012 when they tried to gain access to the presidential debates. And this isn't a matter of whether or not you like the Green Party. It's about whether or not you think that two parties should own our election system, and in so doing, propose minor reforms to their reign while ensuring that their reign continues, that their status cannot be electorally challenged. So for all the potential H.R. 1 has in terms of real election reform, the whole package isn't worth the cost. Power concedes nothing, and the reforms in H.R. 1, though positive in many ways, do nothing to address the stranglehold of the two-party system. And in turn, that stranglehold that the military-industrial complex and big corporations have on our two-party system. In other news from the House, last Wednesday the House passed a war powers resolution kind of ending U.S. involvement in the Saudi-led coalition against Yemen that, as we have noted on the show before, has caused and is perpetuating a genocide in Yemen. Based on the War Powers Act of 1973, this legislation uses the fact that we've never actually declared war as a foundation for pulling our active support of the genocide. Still, the sticky wicket in all of this is that we don't really ever declare wars anymore, do we? We're involved in hundreds of conflicts worldwide, not to mention the possible backing of a civil war in Venezuela, without ever declaring anything close to resembling war. So, while this bill is a powerful sign of the immense work put in by activists in bringing this issue to the forefront of national attention and policy, the military-industrial complex, i.e. our emperors, need not fear too much based on this loophole. Congress hereby directs the President to remove United States Armed Forces from hostilities in or affecting the Republic of Yemen, except United States Armed Forces engaged in operations directed at Al-Qaeda or associated forces. And some of you may recognize that verbiage from the AUMF, or the Authorization for Use of Military Force, which gives presidents the green light to use military force against Al-Qaeda or associated forces anywhere, anytime they damn well please, without having to go through Congress. Much like the aforementioned H.R. 1 legislation, this resolution gives the House a progressive sheen, while leaving them free to carry on with business as usual. In this case, doing nothing to curb the rabid war machine. How exactly that would play out remains to be seen, but before we can even catch a glimpse of that eventuality, the bill has to make it through the Senate, and then on to the president's desk, where he could veto it. Now, our final update before we get to our interview today has to do with healthcare, or sick care as it should be called in this country. After the elections last year that won Democrats control of the House, Nancy Pelosi met with Blue Cross Blue Shield to allay any fears the elections may have raised regarding a push for Medicare for all. In short, that Democrats would be allies to the insurance industry in the fight against single-payer healthcare, focusing instead on strengthening the ACA, or Affordable Care Act, rather than implementing universal health care that would put people's needs above the greed of big insurance and big pharma. In what single-payer advocates are calling the Medicare for Some push, the questions that critics are raising are, of course, who are those some? Do we draw lots? Is it like a healthcare draft? And furthermore, if we're already paying out what Medicare for All would cost, how can people claim that it's about money? Indeed, Medicare for All would actually cut healthcare spending by $2 to $5 trillion over the first 10 years, thanks to, among other things, bloated admin costs no longer being necessary. Of course, The real answer to that bogus question has nothing to do with whether or not we have the money, but everything to do with the money, the bottom lines of big pharma and big insurance. But instead of saying that, like, out loud, this Medicare for some drivel is wrapped in the tired trope of choice, and as with the charter school argument that we've also covered, maintains that choice is the most important thing. Not so much the quality of those choices, but just that you have the right to choose between shitty choices. It follows then, of course, that the choices are shitty because they're founded primarily on the right of insurance companies and big pharma to rake in huge profit, not on the well-being of people. Indeed, far from being a progressive step, all versions of Medicare for some keep the premiums, deductibles, and coinsurance payments required under commercial insurance and the current Medicare program. Medicare for all, on the other hand, means that you'll have to give up the restricted choice of doctors and hospitals under your existing commercial plan. You will be required to give up paying premiums, deductibles, and coinsurance. You no longer will be able to haggle with your insurer about authorizing your care and paying claims. And you will lose the privilege of being forced into a different commercial insurance plan whenever your employer decides to change insurers or when you change jobs. I mean, come on! Who wants to live in such a restrictive society? Wouldn't you much rather live in a society where 2/3 of those filing for bankruptcy cite illness and medical bills as contributors to their financial ruin? Wouldn't you rather live in a place where, despite the pedestaled Affordable Care Act, 87 million American adults are still inadequately insured? Some 20 million have no insurance at all. I mean, wouldn't you rather live in a society where folks have to rely on nonprofit mobile medical clinics rather than just walk into any hospital to see any doctor when they're ill or need medical attention? When you look at the bare and base facts, there really is no question. We need universal health care, and we can do it. But, as I've said before, between here and our goals lies a long road, and the work of mitigating harm and lessening pain between those 2 points is important work. So while it's ridiculous that groups like Remote Area Medical have to exist, literally hundreds of thousands of Americans are damn happy that they do. Since 1985, Remote Area Medical, or RAM, has treated more than 700,000 individuals with the help of more than 135,000 medical volunteers, who set up shop wherever they can to address the grave pitfalls of our so-called healthcare system. A while back, Robert Lambert sat down with us to talk about the important work that RAM does and what our healthcare system really looks like for the most marginalized.
So remote area medical, we only have clinics in communities where we're invited. And there's a process on our website where people can do that. And so we're invited by what we call a community host group. And oftentimes that's a local nonprofit. For example, our clinic in about 2 weeks in West Virginia, the community host group is a free clinic. And so they obviously understand the needs of their community. They identify that people still aren't getting the care that they need. So they're like, we're going to bring RAM in. So it can be a nonprofit. It can be a local group of doctors. It can be a church. It can, one of our clinics we do in Middle Tennessee, the Filipino American Association is the host group. So it can just really be any group of concerned citizens that says, people in our area are having trouble getting the healthcare services that they need. So they invite us. They submit information about their community, health needs assessments, that kind of thing. And then so our clinic manager reviews all of these requests we get. Of course, we can't go to every place where we're requested. We just don't have the time or the resources to do that. So we try to identify which communities need us the most. And then once we decide we are going to do that, do a RAM clinic in their community, so we start working with that community host group to identify a venue, to identify how biohazardous waste will be picked up, to help with volunteer recruitment, as well as follow-up care, because obviously we recognize that while we are only there for 2 or 3 days, people have ongoing issues or ongoing care that they need. So we work with a community host group who has the connections in their community to ensure people can get follow-up care, whether that be a local doctor's office who's like, we'll see 100 patients, after you leave this year for free, or, any kind of discounted medical care, that kind of thing. So we always try to make sure people have access to follow-up care.
Having gone to a free clinic, which is obviously not the same thing, but I remember seeing a large variety and extremity of illnesses. Talk a little bit about some of the things that you see. I'm sure that you see so many different things, but talk a little bit about like that variety and extremity.
Sure. Yeah, we do see a lot of conditions that vary. I will say our medical department always offers general preventative care and general medical exams. But if we have specialty providers who sign up to volunteer, then we're able to offer that on a clinic by clinic basis. So, say we might be having a clinic in Oklahoma and a local podiatrist signs up to volunteer. So we'll be able to offer those services. But that obviously doesn't happen at every clinic. So for medical, we always have that kind of general medical as well as preventative care. But that being said, clinic after clinic after clinic, year after year, the things people are coming to us the most for is dental related conditions. A majority of our people who are seeking our services want our help to take care of their mouth because they're experiencing pain. They might have an infection. They might need a tooth pulled, that kind of thing. We frequently talk to people who've pulled their own teeth with pliers. We talk to people who come in and their teeth are so far gone that they need full mouth extractions. So we see a lot of dental issues, and in our opinion, a lot of these issues could be solved if people had access to the preventative cleanings twice a year, that kind of thing. But we're talking to people who haven't been to a dentist in 30 years. So we see a lot of dental issues. Following that, the second most sought after service we offer is vision care. Hundreds of thousands of people come to us for vision. And you're thinking about it. They drive to the clinic and they can't see. So we make about, I think last year we made 15,000 pairs of prescription eyeglasses. So people do not, they just can't afford the prescription eyeglasses. A lot of times you can get your vision checked at a free clinic, etc., but that doesn't do you any good if you can't get your glasses. And even with that, we, find people who have cataracts, astigmatism, retinal detachment. So, we find lots of people who have like pretty severe vision conditions that could cause blindness. And then in our medical department, it's all over the place. We frequently at every clinic diagnose people who didn't know they were diabetic, didn't know they had, almost fatal hypertension. We diagnose, we've had people come in with lumps who ended up being cancerous. So in the medical area, it ranges from everything from treating a cold to diagnosing diabetes to cancer to you name it. It's just across the board. It's huge. And we always encourage people to see a medical provider when they're there. Oftentimes people will say, well, I'm only here to see the dentist, or I'm only here to see, get a pair of glasses. And we always say, we have a great team of doctors and nurses here. Please go visit them, because just because you're feeling fine otherwise, we still want to check you out and make sure you're okay.
Obviously, you really work with some of the most poor and marginalized communities in the country. And they say one can judge a country by the well-being of the poorest citizens. With that in mind, how would you say that we're doing?
Well, personally, just going to these clinics week after week after week, it's not great. I think the last country ranking from the World Health Organization I looked at, we were like 37th in terms of, health outcomes for for our citizens. And there's countries before us on that list, like Costa Rica, who are like still developing, but they're still healthier than we are. So I think we have a long ways to go in terms of making sure everyone has access to affordable and quality care. You know, back when the Affordable Care Act was enacted, a lot of people were under the impression that, wow, like this is so great. People are going to get insurance coverage and everyone's going to be healthy and it's going to cover preventative care and, this, that, and the other. One thing that we've noticed is, again, even though it may have been a step in the right direction, it still is not covering dental care. It is still not covering vision care. And, a lot of Medicaid state programs are like that as well. And so until there's a program that, kind of covers the whole body, it's going to be a continual issue.
So talk a little bit about, I'm curious if you've had any issues, but obviously you working with this community organization that brings you in. Have you had any issues with law enforcement, or, for instance, I mean, something that I've heard of at free clinics is that sometimes ICE agents will come in and just start looking for people. Have you had any issues with that?
We have not. In fact, one of our longstanding policies is we never ask for identification from any of our patients. So, and that's just because we want to help everyone regardless of their circumstances. So we don't ask for ID. We don't ask for insurance information. We don't ask for income information. Our clinics are open to everyone.
To learn more about remote area medical, please visit ramusa.org. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. As always, thank you so much for watching, and please do spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people that you don't know. Just get it out there. Check out that last slide to see the sites that I've mentioned this week's show. And please, 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 before you turn this off and go grab coffee or whatever else that you're doing, please do sign up for our newsletter. It is the best way to stay up to date on our show. And to those who have donated to keep this show going, thank you so much. Please keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and served my shove. I'm not a violent man, but I will kill for what